42 young men, 2 bears, 1 prophet who'd had enough. This actually happened. It's in 2 Kings chapter 2, and it might be the most disturbing story in the entire Bible. Because here's the thing, God sent those bears. Did 42 people deserve to die for calling a prophet baldy? To understand why this happened, we need to rewind about 10 minutes. Israel, around 850 BCE. The prophet Elijah, one of the most powerful prophets in Israelite history, has just been taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. His successor, Elisha, witnesses the whole thing. And as Elijah disappears, his mantle, his prophetic cloak, falls to the ground. Elisha picks it up. This is the transfer of prophetic authority. Elisha is now the prophet of Israel. But here's the thing about being the new guy. You have to prove yourself. Elijah parted the Jordan River, called down fire from heaven, raised the dead. Those are tough acts to follow. And Elisha knows everyone's watching, wondering if he's the real deal. Elisha goes to the Jordan River. He takes Elijah's mantle, strikes the water parts. He walks through on dry ground. Okay, good start. The witnesses say, the spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha. He's legitimate. Next, he goes to Jericho. The city has bad water, contaminated, making people sick, crops failing. Elisha throws salt into the spring and purifies it. The people are amazed. This new prophet is powerful. He's healing, he's helping. Things are going well. And then he leaves Jericho and starts walking to Bethel. Now Bethel is significant. It's about 15 miles north of Jericho. And in Israel's religious landscape, Bethel has a problem. Bethel was one of the centers of calf worship in the northern kingdom. King Jeroboam had set up golden calves there as alternative worship sites, directly violating God's commands. So when a prophet of the Lord shows up in Bethel, he's walking into hostile territory. This is enemy ground.
As Elisha approaches the city, he encounters a group of young men. Now here's where English translations get tricky. The Hebrew word used is na'ar, which can mean anything from child to young man to young adult. Most scholars agree we're talking about teenagers to men in their early 20s, not toddlers. Think gang of idle young men looking for trouble. Now Elisha is bald. The text makes this clear. Whether from natural hair loss, disease, or his prophetic lifestyle, we don't know, but it's noticeable. And as he walks past this group, they start shouting at him. They yell, "Go up, baldy! Go up, baldy!" Now, if you're thinking this is just playground teasing about hair loss, you're missing what's actually happening here. Go up is a direct reference to Elijah's ascension. They're essentially saying, go up like Elijah did, disappear, die, leave us alone. This isn't mockery, it's a death threat wrapped in religious rejection. They're telling God's prophet to go die. Elisha stops. He turns around. And here's what you need to understand about prophets in ancient Israel. They don't just predict the future. They speak with God's authority. An attack on a prophet is an attack on God himself. And these young men just crossed a line. The text says Elisha called down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. He's not asking God to do this. He's pronouncing judgment with divine authority. And what happens next is horrifying. Then, from the woods nearby, 2 female bears emerge. Now we're talking about Syrian brown bears, massive predators that once roamed this region. Adults weigh up to 700 pounds. They're aggressive, territorial, and incredibly dangerous. And they're heading straight for the young men. The bears attack. The text doesn't spare us the details. They mauled 42 of the young men. 42, not 1 or 2. 42 people torn apart by wild animals, because they mocked a prophet. And then, it's over. The bears return to the woods, the survivors flee, and Elisha continues walking to Bethel. The text doesn't say he prayed for them, doesn't say he helped the wounded. He just keeps walking.
The next verse literally says, "From there Elisha went on to Mount Carmel, and then returned to Samaria." That's it. No explanation, no justification. Just, and then he continued his journey. Like 42 deaths were just part of the day. And here's the thing, it worked. Word spread throughout Bethel and beyond. The new prophet wasn't to be trifled with. God's authority rested on him, and nobody would dare mock him again. So let's talk about why this story makes modern readers so uncomfortable. Because if you're sitting here thinking, that seems like a massive overreaction, you're not alone. This is one of the most controversial passages in Scripture. First, the translation issue. That Hebrew word na'ar has caused endless debate. Some translations say small boys or children, which makes this seem even worse. But most Hebrew scholars agree the context suggests young men, teenagers to 20s. Still terrible, but not toddlers being mauled. Second, the context. This wasn't isolated teasing. Israel had a long history of killing prophets. Jezebel had murdered hundreds of God's prophets. Elijah had to flee for his life. Being a prophet in Israel was genuinely dangerous. And Bethel, specifically, was a center of false worship, actively opposing God's prophets. Third, the nature of the mockery. Telling a prophet to go up like Elijah, to disappear, to die, wasn't a joke. It was theological rejection combined with a death wish. In ancient Near Eastern culture, this was a serious threat. They were essentially saying, "Your God isn't real. Your authority is fake, and we wish you were dead." But even with all that context, we're still left with the central question. Does that justify 42 deaths? Was this proportional? And here's where it gets really uncomfortable. The text never condemns it. It presents this as God's judgment, divine action, not excessive, just justice. Biblical scholars and theologians have wrestled with this for centuries. Some say it was a necessary demonstration of prophetic authority in a violent time. Some say it reveals the harshness of Old Testament grace versus New Testament grace. Some argue the young men were adult gang members threatening violence. Some say we simply can't judge ancient moral standards by modern ones.
And some people just say, this story is in the Bible, and we don't know what to do with it. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Scripture contains stories that don't fit neat theological boxes. Stories where God's actions seem harsh by our standards. Stories that make us ask hard questions about justice, mercy, and divine authority. So why is this story in the Bible? If it's so disturbing, so controversial, why include it? What's the point? I think there are a few possible reasons, and none of them make it comfortable. First, this story establishes Elisha's authority immediately. Right after inheriting Elijah's role, he faces a test. Will people respect God's prophet or not? The answer is delivered swiftly and terribly. Nobody questions his authority again. In 42 deaths, Elisha's prophetic ministry is legitimized. Second, it reinforces a theological principle that runs throughout Scripture. God's representatives are not to be mocked, whether that's prophets, priests, or kings anointed by God. There are consequences for contempt. This isn't about hurt feelings. It's about divine authority. In the ancient Near East, attacking a prophet was cosmic rebellion. Third, maybe it's meant to disturb us. Maybe we're supposed to read this and feel uncomfortable. Because if God's justice always made sense to us, If divine action always aligned with our modern sensibilities, would God still be God? Or would God just be a reflection of our own values? The text doesn't apologize. It doesn't explain. It just reports. They mocked him. He cursed them. Bears killed 42. He continued his journey. And we're left wrestling with what that means about God, about justice, about the price of contempt. 42 people died on a road outside Bethel. And the man who called down the curse that killed them went on to perform miracles, heal the sick, and serve as God's prophet for decades. How do we hold both those truths at once? This is biblical noir. Stories from Scripture that are stranger, darker, and more complex than you ever learned in Sunday school. If this made you uncomfortable, good. That means you're paying attention. Hit subscribe for more stories that'll make you question everything. Next time, the story of Jephthah's daughter, a military victory, a rash vow, and a father who kept his promise, even though it meant sacrificing his own child. Yes, that's in the Bible too. See you then.